Hey, welcome in. Well, today we have another in our continuing series looking at Victor Davis Hanson articles. And we do this because he writes a lot of articles. And, he does do quite a lot of cable news appearances, but not as many as he does articles. And he's barely able to scratch the surface because of the rules of concision or the law of concision on cable news. You don't really have enough time to say much. And I think he's an important thinker, and these seem to be quite popular, so we're going to keep doing them. Anyways, from FoxNews.com, woke elites love to point fingers. Always consider the source of their outrage. And it really does seem as if the tide might be turning on this finger pointing and cancel culture and the phony virtue. It really is getting tiring. I think it offends people's just sense of... I think it offends people intellectually and also just their sense of justice because the hypocrisy is so rife in this. Anyway, let's get into this article. An ancient habit of Western elites is a certain selectivity in condemnation. Sometimes Westerners apply critical standards to the West that they would never apply to other nations. And I would say that that's just the norm, to be honest. My colleague at the Hoover Institution, historian Niall Ferguson, has pointed out that Swedish green teen celebrity Greta Thunberg might be more effective in her advocacy for reducing carbon emissions by redirecting her animus. Instead of hectoring Europeans and Americans, who have recently achieved the planet's most dramatic drops in the use of fossil fuels, Thunberg might instead turn her attention to China and India to offer her, "How dare you?" complaints to get their leaders to curb carbon emissions. Hey, if you could subscribe, like, and share, that really helps me out. Thanks a lot. Yeah, this is something that in a lot of my videos I've made a point of. Europe, North America, these aren't the problems. China and India. In fact, let's take a little look here. This is Environmental and Energy Study Institute. And this is the relevant part here. Since 2000, over 20 countries, including Denmark, Ukraine, Hungary, Ireland, and France, have reduced their greenhouse gas emissions. Of these countries, most have reduced their emissions by more than 10%. Denmark, for example, has reduced its CO2 emissions by more than 30%, and the United States has reduced its by about 8%. And that's not something that you ever hear on CNN or MSNBC or in the New York Times or anything like that. I mean, that seems like a relevant fact you might want to mention to Greta Thunberg and her handlers, the people, the puppet masters, the people that are really controlling that girl who's being exploited. But anyway, let's continue. Whether the world continues to spew dangerous levels of carbons will depend largely on policies in China and India. After all, these two countries account for over a third of the world population and continue to grow their coal-based industries. In the late 1950s, many elites in the United States bought the Soviet Union line that the march of global communism would bury the West. Then, as Soviet power eroded in the 80s, Japan Inc. and its ascendant model of state-sponsored industry became the preferred alternative to Western-style democratic capitalism. But that wasn't the end of the story, was it? No. Once Japan's economy ossified, the new utopia of the 1990s was supposedly the emerging European Union. Americans were supposed to be awed that the euro gained ground on the dollar. Europe's borderless democratic socialism and its soft power were declared preferable to the reactionary U.S. And of course, there have been missteps. I mean, with the U.S., the trade deals, NAFTA, terrible idea. And the foreign adventurism, that hasn't really panned out very well at all. Nation building, not good. But be that as it may, the U.S. is looking pretty good these days by comparison to the EU. And of course, the Soviet Union isn't even around anymore. By 2015, the EU was a mess. So China was preordained as the inevitable global superpower. American intellectuals pointed to its high-speed rail transportation, solar industries, and gleaming airports, in contrast to the hollowed-out and grubby American heartland. Well, these days, particularly, we're starting to see there's some rot underneath all of it, isn't there? Because they're not handling the coronavirus problem very well at all. Here's something very important. Now the curtain has been pulled back on the interior rot of the Chinese Communist Party. Its gulag-like re-education camps, its systematic mercantile cheating, its Orwellian surveillance apparatus, its serial public health crises, and its primitive hinterland infrastructure. Yeah, I don't really get what seems to be, at least, Western intellectual admiration for China. I mean, Trudeau praised China, for God's sakes. And Trump praises the Chinese leader, but we know what he's doing. I mean, he's just negotiating all the time. It's just all the art of the deal, right? Justin Trudeau seemed to actually admire them, which is amazing. But he admired Fidel Castro as well. So, oh, God, such an embarrassment. But anyway, Western intellectual leaders, they seem very uninterested in the gulags. What's happening to the Uyghur Muslims. The essential just cheating on trade all the time. The currency manipulation. Just the authoritarianism of the Chinese government. The lack of free press or just general freedom. I have to say this is all just a mystery to me. Anyway, after the calcification of the Soviet Union, Japan Inc., the EU, and the Chinese superpower, no one quite knows which alternative will next supposedly bury America. Anyway, it goes on. The US and Europe are often quite critical of violence against women, minorities, and gays. Yet if the purpose of Western human rights activism is to curb global bias and hate, then it would be far more cost-effective to concentrate on the greatest offenders. China is currently detaining about 1 million Muslim Uyghurs in re-education camps, yet activist groups aren't calling for divestment, boycotts, and sanctions against Beijing in the same way they target Israel. Why is that? I'm so confused by this. But, I mean, honestly, it's obvious what it is. It's just this, it's political. It's just bring down the system, bring down capitalism. And these are just things to, batter, the West over the head with. Even though the West is by far the best place in the world for women, gays, minorities, everybody. And here Victor tells us homosexuality is a capital crime in Iran. Yeah, media doesn't seem to care about this at all. Don't look to the United Nations Human Rights Council for any meaningful condemnation of worldwide prejudice and hatred, although it is a frequent critic of both U.S. and Israel. Now let's take a look at the UN Human Rights Council. These are members who've just been voted in: Argentina, Austria, Bahamas, Bahrain, Bangladesh, Bulgaria, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Czechia. I've actually never heard of Czechia before. Is it Czech Republic? Denmark, Eritrea, Fiji, India, Italy, Philippines, Somalia, Togo, and Uruguay. So, there's a few on here. Somalia, for instance. You kind of wonder what they're doing on a Human Rights Council. And these are the outgoing members, because they've just elected 18 states to the Human Rights Council, and then some have to leave. So the outgoing members are Belgium, Burundi, Ivory Coast, Ecuador, Ethiopia, Georgia, Germany, Kenya, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, Panama, Philippines, Republic of Korea, Slovenia, Switzerland, Togo, the United Arab Emirates, and Venezuela. They saved the two best for last. I don't think being gay in the United Arab Emirates is, I don't think it's safe. Just safe, period. Venezuela on the Human Rights Council? I mean, come on. You couldn't make this up. It is so absurd. Anyway, there are many reasons for Westerners' selective outrage and pessimism towards their own culture. Cowardice explains some of the asymmetry. Blasting tiny democratic Israel will not result in any retaliation. Taking on a powerful China or a murderous Iran could earn retribution. And on college campuses, university campuses around the West, criticizing Israel is all the rage. That's good. You're not going to get any kind of reprimand for that. But China or Iran, well, the accusation that's going to come with that. We all know. Starts with an R. Anyway, guilt also explains some of the selectivity. European nations are still blamed for 19th century colonialism and imperialism. They will always seek absolution as the citizens of former colonial and third world nations act like perpetual victims, even well into the postmodern 21st century. Yeah, what have the Romans ever done for us? What have the Romans ever done for us? If you haven't seen Life of Brian, watch it. It's funny. What have the Romans ever done for us? Well, they did build the roads. The streets are safe now. Remember what it was like before the Romans? Well, aside from those, what have the Romans ever done for us? But let's look at the horror that colonialism brought upon the world. Anyway, this is from Reason.com. At this month's meeting of the World Economic Forum in, I think they mean Davos there, Switzerland, Gates cited data that showed the proportion of people living in extreme poverty declining from 94% in 1820 to only 10% today. So 200 years ago, 94% of the population of the world was in extreme poverty. I mean, you're one just bad crop away from starvation. So, all these claims about perpetual victimization, that should be taken with a grain of salt. Not everything is just simply one or the other. Anyway, back to the original article. Virtue signaling is increasingly common. Well, we just get enough of that, don't we? Anyway, we're almost at the end here. It is much easier for the city of Berkeley to ban clean-burning, U.S.-produced natural gas in newly constructed buildings than it is to outlaw far dirtier crude oil from Saudi Arabia. Currently, the sexist, homophobic, autocratic Saudis are the largest source of imported oil in California, sending the state some 100 million barrels per year, without which thousands of Berkeley motorists could not get to work. Again, it's the hypocrisy, isn't it? It's just the hypocrisy that's so gross. Apparently, outlawing clean, domestic natural gas allows one to justify importing unclean Saudi oil. Western elites are perpetually aggrieved, but the next time they direct their lectures at a particular target, consider the source and motivation of their outrage. So what is the source and motivation? It's virtue signaling. It's trying to be morally superior. It's a longing for, the days of the Soviet Union and just an unreasoning hatred of productive capitalism. It's a desire to use social justice fallacies to bludgeon individual rights. Economic freedom, individual freedom, free speech. And we know it's more political than it is about the heart, just because they don't care what happens in the rest of the world. They don't care what the Chinese government does. They don't care about gay people being murdered in Iran or Saudi Arabia. They don't care about the quote-unquote patriarchy, the real patriarchy in somewhere like Saudi Arabia and many, many places in the world. They don't care about any of that. So anyway, the next time you hear, one of these lectures directed at you, remember how insincere and just intentionally manipulative they are, and how hypocritical they are. And as with so much of the left these days, when they say one thing, they really mean another. Anyway, that's my take on it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Anyway, thanks a lot for stopping in. Please subscribe, because the algorithm doesn't want to show you this kind of content. It wants to show you corporate stuff. So please subscribe if you want to see more. If you don't have time to watch all my videos, you can listen to the podcast, Richie Baloney Show, on Radio Baloney. It is on Google Podcasts and iTunes and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and CastBox and a million more. Radio Baloney, check it out. Thank you very much. See you next time.